I want to present a radical truth that might not be, very nice to hear, but about 50 or 60% of you in this room will not have jobs in the next 10 years. It's a sad truth, a sad reality, and our conversation today is built around the frame of what we should do in a world that's rapidly evolving so quickly, and how we should frame our minds for the future of work and the future of opportunities. So I start with a question: what will you do tomorrow, right? And I ask that as a literal question, but also as a figurative question. And I'm asking that because I want us to put ourselves in a position where we are already sort of like future focused. 14 years ago, I stepped into my first portal, right? It looked something like this. Some of you are familiar with this, some of us are not, but this is the interface of a version of Photoshop from maybe 10, 15 years ago. This was my first portal, and this gave me a very interesting perspective on life, right? So as a 16, 17-year-old, I would spend a lot of time behind the screens, learning about design, building a worldview that was shaped by pixels and shaped by form factor and understanding the world as a designer. A few years later, my curiosity would get the best of me, and I would ask myself, is this all? Is this the only way I can see the world? Are these the only sort of like frameworks that exist for a very creative and, disturbed person like me, as I used to consider myself in those years? I would eventually become a filmmaker for a brief period of time. I became a filmmaker. I was making videos, we're making films, making commercials, and it was time to step into another portal because I had done this for quite a number of time. And during COVID, when a lot of us were home, something happened. I put on a virtual reality headset, and my entire life and worldview was transformed, right? Now, prior to that moment, I had considered myself a designer. Sometimes I would call myself a filmmaker. But at this point, I was conflicted because I didn't really know what I was at that moment, right? Because I knew that I had fallen in love with this new technology, right? I knew that I needed to learn a bunch of new skills, but what would this mean, for my previous experiences? And this is when I had a reformation of how I think about work and what has framed my current sort of like life view when I think about work and the future of skills. What did I learn from just acquiring skills over, such a short period of time? Skills around design, skills around filmmaking, skills around product design. I learned that our work sometimes, and for a positive reason, tends to be our identity, which is good, which is great, because it helps us move around the world, it helps us make social connections. But a lot of times, the way we view our work and how we interact with the world can also be a limiting factor. Right, so the biggest lesson that I have learned from, sort of like navigating different parts of the workforce and ending up where I am right now is viewing work as a dynamic, fluid ecosystem of skills and connections. And I'll explain what that means. Because since the time that I put the headset on up until now, I've gone ahead to lead an amazing team at FloatsXR, which is an emerging tech company, building virtual reality applications, building world simulations, augmented reality applications, and building the starting sort of like frameworks for AI development in my communities. Now, it was not obviously always like that, right? Because you always need to get to a certain level of threshold to be able to cross, a barrier. But the thing for emerging technology is that those barriers were almost non-existent, for me, right? Because all I needed was a phone and an internet access, and I realized I was able to open myself up to a world of more portals and opportunities. I believe every skill is a portal, and I believe every challenge is an invitation to progress, especially as Africans, where it seems like we always get, the last set of like progress, right? So for internet, for instance, it takes a while, before we get the good speed. For some of the innovations, like it's taking a long time before it's really been spread out across our populace. But for the first time ever, I think we're in a position where we are not necessarily limited by our geography, even if in a sense we are. But we have access to the same opportunities as everybody else in the globe right now, obviously at different levels of scale, but nonetheless. What is the vision of the future of work? What is this world of tomorrow? When I ask what you're doing tomorrow. And I think it's a combination of a bunch of different things, right? So first and most importantly, it is a new way of adopting a way to model the world, right? So your world's you and your thinking, right? That is the first meta skill. Additionally, there are skills which you will need in terms of interacting with computing platforms, interacting with AI, and interacting with the core systems that make up the future of the work. But now, a good way to think about skills and portals is by finding your affinity, right? So a lot of us have sort of like areas that we already naturally gravitate towards. For me, it was creativity and storytelling. Every tool, every platform was merely a portal to express my self-evolution, right? So design, film, and even now as a product designer and emerging technology, I see myself in relation to these skills as an ever-evolving sort of like work in progress, and this is how I proceed into the future. One of the biggest pillars of this world of tomorrow is artificial intelligence, right? We've heard a lot about it. There's no conversation that happens these days without AI being at the forefront of it. And if you're asked, what you think about AI, people will typically gravitate to one of two categories, right? There's the doomers who believe, the machines are coming, they're going to destroy the world, they're going to take over our jobs, they're going to set up like a nuclear destruction and everything's going to go to boom, yeah? To a certain extent, it may be right? But there is also another way to think about this, right? So we can think about the future of artificial intelligence as, rather than a replacement, as an augmentor of our extraordinary capabilities as the human race, right? And there are already brilliant examples of that. Large language models like ChatGPT already help us frame language and carry out basic tasks in terms of like having assistants, having research bodies, having a thinking partner. That already has a very large impact on the continent in terms of knowledge. My mother has used ChatGPT to learn Yoruba in just like 3 months, right? And what has that looked like for her? A patient and understanding partner that doesn't complain, someone that is there for her at every lesson, who shows up at the same time, and is never tired of her plenty questions and nagging. And so when we think about AI, we have an opportunity as a young emerging continent to sort of like build the early guardrails and contextualize this technology for us at this point and build the infrastructure that's available to build complex networks. Another key part of this tomorrow is immersive technology. And one of the big reasons for that is we're very quickly moving into a world that is no more limited by sort of like three-dimensional geometry, right? So we're moving into spaces where there are devices, there are computing platforms that can show us beyond our 3D interpretation of the world, right? And the people who are going to build those platforms, the data that's important for servicing those platforms, and the people who will build the stories in those platforms will come from the people sitting in this room, because we are still very early on the continent. For instance, virtual reality with our work has been able to enter into classrooms and help increase knowledge retention among students. And we've seen situations where people with PTSD or very severe mental health conditions are able to access VR-assisted therapy and see increased success in terms of treatment response than even traditional health practices. As a continent, the youngest continent and the continent with the most potential, arguably, I think we have a very unique advantage. And the unique advantage is that a lot of the fundamentals have still not yet been figured out, which means there's a lot of opportunities for a lot of us sitting in these rooms to build the basics of what that technology will look like for us. So I'm thinking about contextualizing the language of that technology, representing Africans and Africa in these spaces, right? And also building technology that solves the local problems for us without necessarily copying and pasting things that work elsewhere. That being said, we can't just adopt the technology. We have to go into our communities. We need to ask the right questions. We need to find out how these technologies solve the problems that they have and uniquely design and construct them to help us move forward and progress as a continent. I'm ending again by asking, what will you do tomorrow, right? So figuratively speaking, how will you go reframe your mind to be ready for the AI revolution, which is going to take our jobs and everything that's dear to us. But also, how will you invest space, basically, to be able to have some sort of leverage, when a lot of these technologies are much more commonplace. I know what I'm doing, right? So I'm working with not just my company, but with local ecosystem partners to develop infrastructure. For instance, we just built the largest computing facility in the southwestern part of Nigeria. And what that really is a hub that has the computers, the servers, the GPUs to process complex computational tasks for AI, for mixed reality, for gaming development, but also a talent ecosystem and pipeline to find young people who are interested in these worlds of tomorrow, to inspire them and to help them with the resources they need to grow. So as we leave here today, I want to finally ask you guys one last time, what will you do tomorrow? Thank you.